Hello again. I'm Gary Stearman. Welcome to another edition of Prophecy in the News. We have a couple of guests today. Most of you will be familiar with Tom Horn and Cris Putnam. They are the co-authors of this book, which has been a smash hit during the last year. It's called Petrus Romanus. We're going to talk about it and something you won't want to miss. Well, Tom Horn, Cris Putnam, welcome once again to Prophecy in the News.
Hey, great to be with you again, Gary.
Tom, you've been here many times, and we always enjoy talking with you. Let's go back and do a kind of a Petrus Romanus retrospective. Now, this book's been out almost a year, April 2012, and it did some predicting.
Yeah.
It talked about Bible prophecy, but it also talked about the prophecy of the popes. Let's go back and sort of cover the last year.
Yeah, and what a year it has been, too.
Oh, yeah.
As you know, last year we were actually rushing to get that book in print. We wanted it in print by April, which it was, but the reason that we wanted it in print by April was because our research had led us to believe that Pope Benedict was going to succeed from the throne of Peter. He was going to step down and retire and be the first pope in 600 years to have done so. So we really went out on a limb with that prediction, didn't we? I mean, yeah. So, but April came and went, and we thought, well, maybe our calculating wasn't quite as good as we had thought that it was. But thankfully, elsewhere in the book, we had said, well, if he doesn't step down in March or April of 2012, we really believe that he will step down before the end of 2013. Well, as everybody knows, in February of this year, 2013, the Pope made his resignation official. He did step down. We've since had the election of a new Pope. But what was interesting was right after he stepped down, we learned that in fact he had officially resigned internally at the end of March 2012, right when we had suspected that he was going to step down. And that was confirmed by an editor for the El Observatorio Romano, which is the officially owned Vatican media outlet, their newspaper, in an interview with the New York Times, and said that in fact Benedict stepped down officially, did it to a handful of the members of the Curia, the Roman government, and they kept it, he said, in a strict reserve or in a confidence that couldn't be shared even with other cardinals. So in a very strange way, we were right in both occasions. Now, what made this even worse, or better, was 3 weeks before Benedict stepped down, I was on another radio show, and I predicted that the resignation of the Pope was imminent. And when about 21 days later he stepped down, my phone started ringing off the hook.
Oh, I'm sure.
And everybody was saying, okay, who is your insider at the Vatican? And I laughed and said, well, if I said it was the Holy Spirit, they'd really be confused.
They would.
Yeah.
Now, your real insider is Cris Putnam over here, who is a researcher par excellence, and I've used that phrase about him many times. He's got a kind of a bulldog tenacity when it goes to digging out little-known facts. And your contribution to Petrus Romanus, Cris, was in digging out the prophecy of the popes and exposing things that had not been talked about for years, if not centuries.
Well, that's right, Gary. One of the books that I read was a book by a French Jesuit named Father René Thibault. And he actually had written that the final pope would arrive in the year 2012, and he calculated it from several different angles. One that's pretty easy to understand is he calculated the average reign of a pope to be 11 years. And he simply extrapolated that forward and landed in the year of 2012, specifically the month of April 2012. So that was one of the reasons. If you look at pages 57 and 58 of Petrus Romanus, I charted his timing for that, and then we cited the rumor about Pope Benedict's health. And so we actually said that we thought he would step down because of this prediction, and we suggested that. And as it turns out, even though we thought we were wrong for most of the year, it turns out on February 11th that we found out we were correct.
Now, not only has this come to pass in the way predicted, but it's come to pass dramatically, Tom. I mean the drama of the papal resignation, the new pope, everybody's shocked at this new pope who calls himself Francis I. And you have been quick to mention to everybody that there's real significance in the name that he chose, Francis.
Right, and well, first of all, there was a lot of people over the last year that kept insisting that his name would have to be Peter. And if you recall, on the show that we did with you last year, I specifically said it would be a mistake to think that. Of course, he could be somebody named Peter, and there were a couple of Peters, who were in the running to be the next pope. But I wanted to emphasize that he didn't need to be named Peter, didn't have to have that as any part of his Christian name, and no pope would actually take the official papal name of Peter. None has since the Apostle Peter, according to their dogma, is their first pope. And so I wasn't surprised that George Bergoglio was elected, but I was surprised when he took the name Pope Francis, and for a couple of reasons. And I was waiting to hear him say which Francis did he name himself out after? Was it Franz Xavier or whatever his name was, one of the Jesuits? Was it somebody else? And he made it clear in one of his first speeches that he had named himself after Francis of Assisi. That was very key for several reasons. First of all, because Francis of Assisi's original name was Francesco di Pietro de Bernardone. And his name, as an Italian, he was a Roman, his name could literally be translated Peter the Roman, which is the final line in the prophecy, there shall sit Peter the Roman. So he named himself after somebody. I wondered if there was something behind why he did that. But secondly, Francis Assisi was a friar who made prophecies, and they didn't always hold the Vatican in a very positive light. He prophesied that a final pope would arrive. And his prophecy sounds very much like the prophecy of the popes that is ascribed to Malachi O'Morgair, which we used as the basis of this book. And he described a final pope who would arrive that would be under the control of Satan. He said he would be a destroyer, not a true pastor, and that he would lead the church into the Great Tribulation period. Well, that's exactly what the last line of the prophecy of the popes says, that there will sit Peter the Roman, he shall nourish the sheep in many tribulations. So it was so extraordinary that Bergoglio would name himself after one of the most famous Catholic mystics who prophesied about the arrival of the final pope as a pope who would be under the control of Satan. So let me say one final thing about this, though, and that is that in our book, we had said Petrus Romanus may not refer to a Christian name, Peter. We thought that the line Petrus Romanus actually referred to the final pope as Peter, but that the term Romanus was indicative of how this pope would reaffirm the authority of the Roman Catholic Church and of the pontiff in particular over all other religions and all other people. And the thing we didn't see coming was a Jesuit. For the first time in history, you have a pope who is a Jesuit, and the Jesuits are under oath to actually accomplish exactly what we had speculated in the book, to hold the pontiff as basically the ruler of Christendom around the world, and secondly, to stop the spread of Protestantism. And now you got Time magazine, a big picture of Pope Francis, and over the top of it says one world pope. You have National Evangelical Christian magazine saying this is the pope for all Christians, including for Protestants. So it's just astonishing.
I'm going to ask both of you a question now, which I've never asked either one of you, and I want you to share in answering this. If going back in your minds, what led you to write Petrus Romanus? Let's go back to the year 2011, 2010. Where was the kernel of the idea that caused you to come up with this thesis?
Well, I had known about the Malachi prophecy, just from seeing maybe on the History Channel and some kind of oblique references to it. And, I was aware that it had this apocalyptic ending that seemed to forecast the end times. And, Tom had mentioned it briefly in Apollyon Rising, maybe just a couple sentences. And, Tom and I were communicating over the internet through email and stuff. We thought it was remarkable that Pope Benedict was so old, and that, there are obviously a lot of people that believe this prophecy. It's been around for hundreds of years, and Catholics have been speculating on it, but nobody was writing anything or saying anything about the fact that it was about to come to its end, one way or the other. And, from there, we just decided to look into it. And then, of course, as our investigation ensued, just untold documents started unfolding, new facts that we never would have imagined. I mean, this whole thing with 2012 and Rene Thibault, and I mean, we didn't see any of this coming. You know, it kind of happened. It felt like we were led. It really did. I mean, the sorts of discoveries that we came across just seemed beyond coincidence to me.
I remember you said everything sort of fell together.
Well, it was preternatural. I had only written one paragraph about this in Apollyon Rising and only mentioned it because other people were pointing to it as part of the whole 2012 community, you know, talking about the end of the Mayan calendar. And so I had only mentioned it because other people had mentioned it. I wasn't even interested in it, except from a historical point of view, that you had a potentially 900-year-old prophecy that was coming to an end. So in that sense, it was interesting. And I happened to be speaking at a conference, and my son and I got in a conversation that day. Hadn't thought about this in probably 3 years. He starts asking me about the prophecy of the popes. I said, it is interesting, isn't it, that nobody is writing a book that the very next one, whether you believe in the prophecy, you don't believe in the prophecy, but the very next pope will be the 112th line, the final pope. So we're talking about that, and he said, well, Dad, you should do a book on this. You should write about it. And so I went up to my hotel room to write down some notes, and while I was up there, I clicked on my email, and here was a note from Cris Putnam. He and I had never talked about this before, and he's asking me about the prophecy of the popes, wanting to know if he can quote that one paragraph from my 3-year-old book, Apollyon Rising. And from that day forward, that kind of stuff, strange dominoes just started falling into place, and information coming to us, like the whole Rene Thibault thing. That book was in obscurity. There were only 2 copies, as far as we know, in print. It was 61 years old. And yet Cris found it and then translated it from French into English, and over again he is saying that the 111th Pope is going to step down in April 2012. He predicted this 61 years in advance. And again, he's a Jesuit, and we're finding out, which will in a while will take us into the second book, that the Jesuits seem to be right in the middle of what could be the greatest conspiracy of all time concerning the arrival of this final pope.
And the new pope, Francis I, is a Jesuit.
That's right.
Well, Petrus Romanus, you've all heard about it. You've seen the waves that this book is making literally all over the world, and it's about to be translated into other languages as well. But, gentlemen, that leads me to a transition to this particular book. It's called Exo-Vaticana, and it sort of takes up where Petrus Romanus leaves off, but it's not just a sequel. This book is its own bombshell, and Cris and Tom kind of share in telling me about the genesis of this book. How did it come about? What was the kernel idea? It has a cover that some people would say is kind of controversial. It has the Vatican City here, the dome of St. Peter's, and over that dome is a UFO beaming energy down into the to the Vatican. And that seems a bit far-fetched, except, wait a minute, it actually happened.
It absolutely did, Gary. 1978 is known to Roman Catholics as the infamous year of 3 popes. Now, what I'm talking about is this is when Pope Paul VI died. They elected John Paul I, and he only lived 33 days, and then he died mysteriously. He was the Pope, the Malachi prophecy said, from the midst of the moon. He ascended to the papacy during a half moon in its waning phase, and really only lived a lunar cycle as Pope. And what is particularly interesting, that it was John Paul II after him, so you had 3 popes in this really brief period of time. But right in the middle of that 33-day papacy, there was a massive UFO flap over the city of Rome. Now, I'm not talking about some little ambiguous lights in the sky. I'm talking about military officials, police officers, guards at the Vatican reported seeing a giant triangular craft, also a donut-shaped round craft beaming down a green beam of light. Now, this came from multiple eyewitnesses.
And there are photos, I understand.
Well, it made the newspapers. It made the newspapers in the New York Times in the United States, and I actually got a copy of one of those articles, and we put a copy of that in the book, and it's also posted on my website. And it's just talking about a massive amount of UFO sightings right there in the middle of this brief papacy. And then 2 weeks after that ensued was when John Paul I died.
Now, Tom, for a long time, I've been following your writings, and you've been systematically covering the story of Vatican spokespersons who, over the years, have been in a very spread out and timely fashion, exposing little bits and pieces of information that indicate a Vatican, if you will, alien intelligence alliance of some sort, which when I say the words, I'm saying, did I actually hear that coming out of my mouth? And yet you've been documenting this. You and Cris actually took a trip to an observatory. That lies at the heart of Exo-Vaticana. Take us to the next step in this adventure.
Well, that's true. I mean, last year we were doing these shows on Petrus Romanus, and here's the trigger. Here's what caused this to happen. As you say, I had been documenting some of the spokesperson for the Vatican. They're out there talking about ET as our brother and all that, and kind of wondering, where are they coming from on this? Why do they feel the need suddenly, especially over the last 3 years, the last decade, but especially the last few years? And so when we were doing these shows on Petrus Romanus, when it was call-in shows, more and more of the people who were calling in, they weren't even asking us about the final pope or the prophecy of Malachi. What they wanted to know is, what can you tell us about the Vatican ET connection? And inevitably, anytime we would get on those answers, those shows would go to literally the top. We did one show on the Vatican ET connection, and it was the #1 blog talk show in the world for 2 months almost. So it showed us that the world is really connected to this question. It was resonating with them. That they too, maybe at some gut level, if you will, had a feeling that there's something here that's more than what we've heard the Jesuits that are talking about this admit to so far. So what we decided to do, if you wanted to get the answer, you go right to the horse's mouth, right? So we decided that we were going to take a journey. That's where we were going to start our investigation. We were going to go to Mount Graham in Arizona. Now, a lot of people don't know that the Vatican has a significant telescope on the top of a mountain in Arizona. The mountain is called Mount Graham, and there's actually 3 telescopes on the top of that mountain. Theirs is called, the abbreviation is VAT, but it stands for the Vatican Astronomical Technology Telescope. And that is where the Jesuits, who are studying deep space, Jesuit astronomers, who were formulating some of these opinions, like Funes and Guy Cosmonalgo and people like that, were doing some of the research. So we thought, hey, let's see if we can put together a trip. And we did. We put it together through the University of Arizona. We got it. You can't go up there unless you're invited. It's all locked off. It's all guarded. There's police up there. They'll arrest you if you try to walk in. And so we put the trip together, met with the man. That by itself, by the way, is its own story we won't have time to tell. Pretty hilarious, actually. There's no guardrails on all these switchbacks. And I mean, there's places where you could go off the side of this mountain. And I know that our driver was really having fun on some of those curves looking in the rearview mirror at us, right? But we get up there, and what we found out talking to the Jesuit on duty that day, what we found out about the Vatican's telescope, what we found out about the other telescopes, what we found out about the large binocular telescope, which is the largest one of its kind next door that actually hosts a device.
Now, let me stop you right there. 3 telescopes. Get this picture. This is no small observatory. This is an observatory complex, multi-million-dollar installation, carefully guarded. Has a classic optical reflecting telescope. It has a smaller guide scope, and as I understand it, a scope that's used for finer investigations of limited portions of the sky. But the one I want to get to is this binocular telescope you're talking about, which is just spooky. Let's put it that way. And you devote a lot of time to talking about that. So let's go from there.
Well, and I want Cris to weigh in here too, but the large binocular telescope is the one that hosts a device that we wanted to see. It's called the Lucifer telescope. It's an acronym that only Cris is probably the only guy in the world that can actually tell you what the acronym stands for. It's an infrared device, let me let him say some stuff, but then I'll tell you what I think it's being used for.
And wow, I wish we had 3 hours here. But okay, Lucifer.
So the Lucifer device is an infrared camera. It's an acronym, and I think it's really forced. I think they really had to make it They wanted it to be Lucifer, to say Large Binocular Telescope, Near Infrared Utility with Camera and Integral Field Unit for Extragalactic Research. Now, to fit that under the letters Lucifer, you kind of have to do some special massaging.
But Lucifer is a very prominent Latin word, which means the bearer of the light or light bearer, and his name is suggestive of perhaps something new, perhaps an illumination of some sort.
In the King James Bible, it famously shows up in Isaiah 14 and is readily applied to Satan, to the fall of the devil. And so that's where the term Luciferian comes from. And that came from the Latin Vulgate translation of the Bible. So, it's a reference to Satan. And we, in uncovering who named this thing, did the Jesuits really name a telescope Lucifer?
So you went there with Tom, now, and you talked to the astronomers. You talked to these people, and they were rather open, as I understand it. From that conversation, what did they believe about aliens coming to planet Earth?
Well, they mentioned UFOs almost casually. I mean, the purpose of the Large Binocular Telescope really is astrobiology.
Astrobiology. Now, that's a fancy word, but what does it mean?
It's the marriage of astronomy, the study of space, and biology, the study of life. So it's quite literally the science of studying life in space.
So they believe there is alien extraterrestrial life and that it's coming our way.
I think it's an inevitable consequence of their worldview. They do believe in it, and one of the primary missions of the Large Binocular Telescope is the search for exoplanets. And that's kind of where the spinoff of our book, Exo-Vaticana, comes from. It's a word that means outside of, external. It's a prefix. And so exoplanet denotes a planet that's outside of our solar system. Now, what's interesting is in 1996, we've discovered the first one. So up until 1996, we didn't know if there were any at all. Now, today, they've cataloged over 600 exoplanets. Now, most of these are what they call hot Jupiters. They're huge, and they're really close to their stars, so they're just hellish temperatures. Now, right now, they have about 11 on the short list that they call habitable. Now, I think that's a misnomer. What that really means is that it could potentially contain liquid water. It's not too far away, it's not too close to its star, so that water wouldn't evaporate or freeze. And so their worldview is naturalistic, Darwinism. Basically, if you have water and the right temperature, that life will just kind of poof into existence.
Now, Tom, in about 2 minutes, the clock is rolling, and what a subject we're on today. Tell me what you have gleaned from your contact with these people, because they look at extraterrestrial life not simply as some incidental thing. They look at it as purposeful. Apparently, they believe that the people who are coming our way are going to create a new world here on Earth when they finally arrive and expose themselves.
Absolutely. Among the Jesuit astronomers that we talk to and we chronicle in our book, and let me say that the free DVD that we're giving away with this book also has some of the very documents that they provided to us. These are theses, these are theological essays which are being written by Opus Dei level theologians for the church that are now crafting the language that will be used for adopting a dogma that would accommodate a dynamic ET reality. And among them, there are those who they go beyond saying it's more likely than not. I get the feeling from them that they know something we don't know, or they think they know something we don't know, and they are in fact anticipating an imminent reality that would include either disclosure of alien intelligence on another world, or perhaps they're even on Earth now. The Vatican spokesman on this subject, Corrado Balducci, only died not long ago, and he went on Italian television saying that not only are they real, not only do they exist on other worlds, but there is an element of them on Earth now. And he said the Vatican is not only aware of it, they're using their embassies to quietly collect information from around the world. Now keep in mind, this guy was the exorcist for Rome. He was a highly placed Vatican official, and he said these things on TV, and he's never been corrected. The Vatican has never come out and said, our spokesperson for the ET reality, which was his job, made some of this stuff up or was speaking fancifully. They never corrected what he said.
And they regard these beings as superior, spiritually superior to us.
Yeah, they actually started out, Jose Funes followed, remember when they had their study week on astrobiology in 2009? 90 days later, the Royal Body of Science out of the UK hosted an event called The Detection of Extraterrestrial Intelligence and Its Impact on Society, in which they too followed up. And Jose Funes, as a spokesman for the Vatican, was interviewed by the El Observatorio Romano. Then he was saying, they're real, and we would baptize them as brothers in Christ. But now, Gary, they're saying something entirely different, far scarier than what they started out talking about.
Gentlemen, you have whetted our appetites today. You all remember Petrus Romanus. We're still making it available to you for $19.95, plus shipping and handling. Now we have something to add to it. It's Exo-Vaticana, and the subtitle here, Petrus Romanus, Project Lucifer, and the Vatican's astonishing plan for the arrival of an alien savior. We have only barely touched on the contents of this book. This book available for $19.95, plus shipping and handling. Both of these, the Petrus Romanus and Exo-Vaticana, yours for $39.90. And I've got to throw this in. We always like to include something free. If you call the 800 number on your screen right now and ask for Project Lucifer and the Final Pope package, you're going to get a free data DVD. And Tom, in about 30 seconds, what's on this data DVD?
That DVD, I mean, if you had to buy what's on that, it would cost you hundreds of dollars. There's over 150 books. There's over 25,000 pages. There's entire libraries. There's a collection of Kindle books that are on there. There's several dozen hours of interviews that we did with experts around the world, including former government leaders on the UFO reality, all on there free.
Both books and the free bonus data DVD, yours for $39.90 plus shipping and handling. Just call the 800 number on your screen, ask for Project Lucifer and the Final Pope package, and you will be amazed at the information you'll receive. Gentlemen, we're down to 30 seconds. Cris Putnam, I wish we could talk for another hour. You are always alert, brilliant, incisive. Come again. And by the way, we're going to talk to these gentlemen on another program, and we're going to take off from where we left off today, and it's going to be exciting stuff. Cris, come back. And
Thank you very much.
Tom, blessings in your work. It's just amazing what you continue to come up with.
Well, Gary, it's great to be with you again, as always.
And to the rest of you, you know, these are amazing times in which we live. And as we always say, you know, he's coming. He's at the door. So keep looking up. Prophecy in the News is a viewer-supported program made possible by our many friends around the world. Be sure you tune in every day for breaking news and our daily prophetic news updates at prophecyinthenews.com, or follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/prophecyinthenews.